G'day ladies and gents, welcome back to Kerbal Space Program with Mags. So taking off where we were in the last video, we're beginning our departure from the Mun. Jeb is getting ready to leave. A short run up of the engine at low thrust, just to clear ourselves from the surface of the Mun. Now our departure is going to be slightly different than our arrival. The money that Jebediah has earned for achieving the Mun landing has already been spent. The facilities at Kerbal Space Center have been upgraded and we now have access to patch conics and maneuver nodes, and this is going to make our return home a lot easier. And this is an important thing to remember in Kerbal Space Program Career Mode. When you achieve the mission objectives, you are immediately paid for them. Even if the mission in total isn't complete, you haven't made the return home. So I blew through around 250,000 credits upgrading the radar facilities. That gave me access to patch conics, and upgrading the command center gave me access to maneuver planning and maneuver nodes. Now you don't actually need either of these in order to be able to leave the Mun. Getting home is as simple as getting there. Taking off, aligning your nav ball to an equatorial axis, and then beginning your burn out. But the maneuver nodes are going to make it much easier for me to demonstrate exactly how to efficiently do this. So just adjusting my maneuver node at the moment, I want to burn high and get a lot of altitude very quickly as I clear the surface of the Mun, so I've got a nice high apoapsis. Now this departure profile is pretty much to conserve fuel. If I can get a high apoapsis straight away on the far side of the Mun to Kerbin, that gives me a good position to burn from for a very low fuel load, as I've got very little fuel left in the command module, in order to make a direct transfer back to Kerbin. There will be no orbit of the Mun, there will be no orbit of Kerbin. I'll be going straight in. And this is why you see me zooming the camera back in and out. I'm trying to make sure that that apoapsis on the Mun is on the far side of the planet, directly across from Kerbin. It will just make that transfer easier. Now I'm coming up at around 30 seconds, ready to burn. Just using Jebediah's pilot skills to keep the command pod aligned on the prograde axes, ready to fire. Just coming up on 20 seconds remaining to burn. Now having access to the maneuver nodes gives me a bar on the right hand side of the nav ball, which tells me exactly how much delta V I'm going to have to burn in order to complete this maneuver, providing I stay on the prograde marker. So throttles up to maximum, we've got about half a kilometre of delta V we need to burn. The entire burn is going to take around about 16 seconds from this point. 240 metres per second left to go, retract the landing gear. Almost done, and burn complete. Shut down the engines, go back to orbital map, and we're almost perfectly on the marker. So we can clear away that planned maneuver and start planning the next one. Now we need to put one right on the apoapsis, and this is going to be a straight through burn. And this is where patch conics comes into play. What it's displaying is where my command module is going to go once it completes its burn. So as I continue the burn through for longer and harder, as you can see, it slowly approaches the surface of Kerbin. So we want to burn right in, and we're going to keep burning in a straight line from the apoapsis on the Mun until our periapsis is deep inside Kerbin's atmosphere. So let's do a quick check there. We're looking at 83. We need to burn a little bit further in. That's going to skim the atmosphere but not get in. That's a surface hit there, so that'll do. So our transit burn home is going to take 368 meters per second. We're going to have to burn for 15 seconds at the periapsis. This is going to give me almost no fuel remaining. Now this does mean I'm going to be hitting the atmosphere at orbital velocities. I would expect somewhere around 3,000 meters per second, maybe slightly less, so this is really going to put the heat shield on the command pod under stress. Unfortunately, this particular mission has been fairly inefficient on fuel, being an early rocket launch and not having access to the right parts, which as a result has left me with very, very little fuel to play with. Normally using this kind of return, I like to have at least half a kilometre's worth of delta V left in the fuel tank that I can use to suicide burn just before entering the atmosphere to take the edge off that atmospheric impact and save the heat shield a little bit of stress, but unfortunately it is not going to be an option this time. So fast forwarding time a little bit here, we're going to bring ourselves up onto the maneuver node quickly. 25 seconds out of burn now. We're aligned down the trajectory, so we just got to wait, and I want to get right on this maneuver node because I can't afford to waste fuel by burning early. I usually like to give myself 10 seconds before burn, start throttling it up, because it takes a few moments for the engines to get up to full power. Burn commenced. We're already halfway through the burn, it's a very short one. 2 seconds remaining. And we're going to give it a little bit more on the engines, just try and keep the fuel consumption low to complete the burn. I want to get it perfect. Burn complete. So we quickly zoom the camera out and we'll see exactly how we did, and as you can see, perfect intersect of Kerbal, right on the maneuver node. So we're clear to return. Jeb's just got to ride this pod back home. Now with Jebediah safely on his way back to Kerbal, we flick over to the second mission I have active. The last we saw of Valentina Kerbal, she just put a Muna 1 command module and ascent stage into Kerbal orbit, and she was getting ready for a transfer through to Minmus. Now unfortunately we ran into a problem. We didn't have access to patch conics or maneuver nodes at the time, and this is going to be a particularly difficult transfer to Minmus. The main problem here is the Mun is actually smack bang in the middle of our transfer path through to Minmus, so we've had to plot a course that intersects the Mun and slingshots us in the direction of Minmus, and we're going to have to perform a second burn during the Mun flyby in order to complete the Minmus transfer. So we're just aligned up on the maneuver node now, just continuing to time accelerate down to burn time, 30 seconds out, 28 seconds. We're going to start this burn a little bit earlier, it won't make too much of a difference. Now the ascent stage doesn't have a huge amount of fuel left, so I'm just going to burn it as much as I can, then jettison and go straight over to the command stage. This particular rocket got up with vastly more fuel than the Muna 3 that completed the Mun landing, so we have excess fuel to spare. The command stage's main engine also, it's slightly smaller than the one that was used on the Muna 3, but it's vastly more efficient, so we should run into no fuel problems through this entire mission. 28 seconds left on the burn. 300 meters a second left to go. Maneuver almost complete. 15 seconds. 10 seconds left to go. We should have an intersect with the Mun by now. Just completing it out. I want to get around about a 400 kilometer apoapsis on the Mun for the transfer burn. So we'll just flick over to the map and take a look at the burn, and we've got a great intersect, 426 kilometers. That will do nicely. That gives us a nice, good angle of attack. We've almost got an intersect with Minmus already, so it's not going to take much of a burn. Quickly fast forwarding time up to Muna apoapsis. Now we will have to make a slight adjustment on the burn here, because Minmus isn't on an equatorial orbit of Kerbal, it's on a slight incline. So we've got to adjust our maneuver once we clear the Mun sphere of influence, so we catch Minmus on its descent angle. Now as you're about to see, as we cleared the sphere of influence of the Mun's gravity actually slowed us down, so we no longer have that close intersect of Minmus, so we're going to have to burn a little bit further in order to get that intersect back, as well as change our angle in order to intercept Minmus in the first place. So first things first, we'll just look at the angles of attack. We're definitely going to have to slow it down. Okay, there's the intersect that we had, and just adjust in. It's going to take a little bit of playing around to get a nice clean intersect. This was actually nowhere as clean as I normally do it. It's been a long time since I've done a slingshot transfer in order to get to a planet, so it was taking me a little bit of remembering and exactly how to get this all lined up. So I've just about got the angles right. I'm going to adjust for angle in the first burn, and then I'm going to readjust in order to get the intersect. So we've lined up for the angle transfer. This is going to be a particularly short burn. It's 8 seconds long in total. Now with this burn complete, we're now on the same orbital plane as Minmus, so it should be a simple matter to get the intercept that we're actually after. Now, the problem I was running into beforehand, why I had to do this in 2 burns, is my orbits were constantly going above Minmus and never quite catching it, as I was getting Minmus on a descent in its orbit. So, with that maneuver planned, we're just going to wait through, throttle up, and this again isn't going to be an incredibly long burn, only 6 seconds long in total. Just activating the SAS here. Realigning and continuing the burn. And burn complete. I should now have an intercept with Minmus. Time to Minmus apoapsis is 3 days, so we've got plenty of time. We'll close down the maneuver node and let's flick back over to Jebediah Kerbal and bring him home. So we meet back up with Jebediah in the final moments of his descent into Kerbal. Now, I've run into a small problem here. I've accidentally left the SAS module on as he's been returning home, and it's drained the batteries. The Muna 3 isn't equipped with solar panels. I don't have access to the technology yet, so I'm going to have to perform a short burn in order to get some power in the batteries, so I can actually line this thing up retrograde. Just burning the engines as low as I possibly can. All I want is the power. I don't want to actually throw my orbit off too much. Retrograde has been completed. Now, this is just something I like to do. There's no particular reason for it. I just like to deploy all the landing gear and all the modules as much as I can during the descent into an atmosphere. Once I jettison the command pod, if the service module actually stays close enough to the command pod, having all the landing gear deployed makes some rather nice effects as it disintegrates itself going through the atmosphere. So we're 113 kilometers up and descending at 3,000 meters per second, so I'm going to fire up the engines and burn the last of my fuel, trying to kill as much velocity as I possibly can. But, as I said, we're cutting it fine on the fuel load. I'm just about out, and there it is. We're out of fuel. Still over 3,000 meters per second, so this last burn didn't slow us down a whole lot, but it did recharge the batteries in the command module, which is going to give me access to SAS for the remainder of the descent, which is, well, useful. Use the retrograde pilot skill to align back on the retrograde marker and then just activate stability assist. I want to bring it in relatively flat with manual control. I have a little bit too much sensitivity for such a small command pod, so I'm going to activate fine control by hitting caps lock on the keyboard. This gives me vastly less movement on my controls. It's much easier to bring a small command pod into the atmosphere using this. And apparently I have a crew report from the upper atmosphere, so I'll grab that on the way down too. I am not grabbing that EVA report, not at 3,000 meters per second, about to enter the atmosphere. 33 kilometers up and we've just hit the meat of the atmosphere. Thermal shockwave is in effect. And I'm just slowly watching the ablative on the heat shield for the command pod, and it is going down fast. Still over 2,000, just dropping below 2,000 now. 1,500 meters per second. We're on the max on the G load. I'm actually surprised that didn't kill Jebediah, if I'm entirely honest. Now the pod has built up so much temperature and re-entry that even now we've slowed down to the point where we're no longer getting a thermal shockwave. You can see the ablative is still ticking down. The heat shield is still disintegrating just on the ambient heat that is still in the skin. But with 16 units remaining, it should be enough that the pod isn't going to explode before it touches down at this point. I expect we're probably going to have about 10 units remaining, and we've slowed down enough here that I can deploy the parachutes. Now at 5 kilometers up with the parachutes deployed, it's actually going to take around 8 minutes real time in order to complete this descent, so I'm not going to show the entire thing. Yeah, heat shield's still ticking down at 15. Yeah, I think that's going to come down to around 10 before it stops, which is fine. All the science is kept on board, Jebediah is safe, and the return from the Mun is complete, so that is the successful completion of the Mun mission. Not the most gentle re-entry I've ever had, but definitely successful. I would say that is probably the upper limit for the first command module you get access to. Anything more severe than that, and you're likely just going to kill your Kerbal and destroy your pod. So let's go check out the mission results. So a safe return and 326 science recovered, but I did only hit one biome and a couple of small science areas on the way in and out of the landing. So in the future I think I'll have to plan my missions to hit multiple biomes if at all possible. Now the actual return of funds, only 356 funds were recovered on a ship that cost me around 26,000 credits to put into orbit in the first place, so not the most efficient mission in terms of credits. So back to Valentina Kerman, who is just about to enter the sphere of influence of Minmus, and there we go, we have our encounter. So the first thing we need to begin doing is planning out a deceleration burn in order to give ourselves an orbit of Minmus. Now my original plan for this mission was just to do a simple orbit and then return to Kerbal, hitting high and low level Minmus science. I actually only have enough science experiments on board to hit what I can get at high altitude and hit the low altitude science at the same time. Now low altitude science for Minmus is very low, so I want to bring my periapsis down to around 20 to 30 kilometers in order to be able to get it. Once again, I want to do a little bit of fine tuning here because I'm going to be very fast at the periapsis, and my thought was at this time, at the periapsis I would do a burn that would actually return me through to Kerbal. So with the manoeuvre planned, but before we complete the burn, time to start grabbing that high altitude Minmus science. Science experiments for this mission are a materials study, an EVA report, crew report, and a goo canister, all of which will be transferred through to the command pod and brought home on mission completion. It looks so small and yet so delicious. Well, I suppose Minmus does look like a giant ball of mint ice cream. Materials study. Samples react to the lack of atmosphere. Well, I imagine they would, considering I'm in space. I'm actually surprised. I've got the community science reports mod installed on, but I haven't really been getting any of them, only the default ones. You feel like eating the goo. Considering it came out of a dumpster, that is probably not a great idea, Valentina. So we're still 57 minutes away from our planned maneuver node. So first things first, we'll align the command module to the maneuver node. Now I've got to do this all manually, just with SAS as the only assistance that I have. Valentina Kerman, this is her first flight, so she has none of the pilot abilities that are unlocked by getting experience. She should have a few of them unlocked upon completion of this mission, but none until we return her home. Now we're all lined up, we begin our fast forward of time. Unfortunately, we overshoot it slightly by 16 minutes, but immediately start the burn. It shouldn't matter too much, I wouldn't think. Again, just a short burn. The gravity of Minmus is so low, all of these burns will be very short and controlled. Clear the maneuver node, and let's see where we're at. 27 kilometers. That's below 30, that's low enough that we will get into Minmus low altitude science. So, 32 kilometers after we've fast forwarded through time. And at this point I'm just letting us descend at normal speeds. As soon as we pass below 30, my little science alert mod will go off to let me know the science is available. I can quickly pick it up and then I can start planning the burn out. Or at least that was my plan for the original mission profile. However, I'm sort of looking at my setup at the moment. I've got over half a tank of fuel still left on board. I'm coming over the light side of Minmus. We're facing the sun, so I've got a nice clear and clean landing zone that I can see, and we're coming over the Minmus ice lakes. So just quickly going out to collect all the science that I've got and make sure it's all in the command pod and secured. Now the thing about the Minmus ice lakes is they're almost flat, which makes them the perfect landing zone for a vehicle that is not equipped with landing gear. And with Minmus's incredibly low gravity, you can very gently touch your engine down without damaging it and breaking it off the rocket, providing you have control. So I started looking at exactly how much delta V it was going to take me in order to put this thing down on the surface. Now the first thing I check is how much fuel it's going to take to actually lower my orbit down to the point so I can do a very, very, very gentle approach, very little fuel, very controlled. I'm going to burn about 65 meters a second to bring myself down to a 20 kilometer orbit. Now the thing here is it's only going to cost me slightly more than that to just do a straight landing right onto the ice lakes that are almost directly below me at the moment. They're almost in perfect position to land on. So rather than completing the orbit, I decided I am going to land this thing, and I'm going to land it directly onto the ice lakes. It's looking like around 131 meters a second to put ourselves down directly onto the ice lakes, which, considering my current fuel load, is a drop in the well. So we're going to align and go for it. SAS activate, and just align ourselves to the maneuver node. We're almost directly on top of the node, so we'll begin our burn almost immediately. Once again, it's an incredibly short burn due to Minmus's low gravity, and our actual descent, despite looking incredibly steep, is going to be very, very slow. Our horizontal speed is only 40 meters per second at this point, so this is really, really bringing it in gentle. Unfortunately, I slightly overcooked it on the burn, and I've actually brought my landing zone in on the edge of the hills, on the edge of the ice lake, which is not where I want to land. I do not want to land this thing on anything that's angled because I don't have landing gear. I'm going to want a large flat area because it is likely going to topple over and I'm going to have to take off from my side. So rotate the rocket around, do a short burn just to bring myself back to the ice lake, and we continue our descent. Now I bring the rocket back around here to repoint retrograde before I begin time acceleration. However, I am going to have to watch my landing very carefully because not only am I approaching the planet, but the planet itself is also rotating. And while Minmus's rotation is not particularly fast, it could be fast enough to throw off my landing zone. Which it in fact was. A few minutes of time acceleration later, and I can see I'm going to come back down on those hills on the edge of the ice lake. So I'm going to have to rotate the rocket around and do another burn to put myself down on the ice lakes. This burn is almost going to have me moving horizontal across the surface rather than lowering my altitude. But at this point my vertical speed is only 98 meters a second, I'm not dropping incredibly fast, my horizontal speed is only in the 20s, so a slight adjustment is not going to take much fuel, it's not going to take much to counter. That should give me more than enough to slide across the ice lakes and decelerate at the last second, so bring myself back around retrograde. No more maneuver planning from this point in, I'm going to eyeball the landing. So just keep myself on the retrograde marker and I'm just watching myself slip over the ice lakes. I want to make sure I'm around about halfway across before I begin my burn, and then I'm looking to try and counter my vertical and horizontal speeds to 0 so I drop vertically directly to the ground. .3 kilometers off the surface, we're almost halfway across the lake. Alright, time to start this burn. Now I'm just carefully watching my horizontal and vertical speeds here. It shouldn't take too much of a burn to counter everything back to 0. And I'm keeping a close watch on my retrograde marker. As it starts sliding up, I just want to keep following it. And eventually it should point directly up. This landing is actually one of the easiest landings that you can perform in Kerbal Space Program, and if you have a pilot that has access to some of the pilot skills like Jebediah does, this landing becomes so easy you can almost do it blindfolded. Second burn. Very short, just trying to counter some more velocity, make that retrograde marker continue moving up. I'm only doing burns of about 6 or 7 meters per second in order to control this deceleration and get myself aligned for this landing. Now the idea, I want to put myself down at under 1 meter a second. Now that's under 1 meter a second vertical with as close to 0 horizontal as I possibly can achieve. Because I'm landing on the engine itself, the engine can break in 2 ways. Direct impact, which is your vertical speed, as well as side pressure, which comes from your horizontal. If you're moving too fast sideways, even if you land very gently in the vertical, you can still rip the engine off. No engine means no trip home, and I didn't pack in any extra supplies for an extended stay on Minmus. I wasn't planning on landing, so the life support in this pod is only enough to complete this mission, nothing more. And if you look slightly to the lower left of the rocket, you can see my shadow has just appeared. We're around 300 meters off the surface, so I'm just beginning a long, extremely low level burn to cut my speed down. Horizontal speed is now measured in millimeters, vertical speed is down to 3 meters per second. .200 meters off the surface. Second last burn before touchdown. I'm just going to do lots of short squirts at this point. 5 meters per second. 70 meters up. .50 meters up, down to 3, just controlling it tightly. Now we're under 1 meter a second on descent. I've got to float it in this area as I pass down the last of the landing. 20 meters. Just about there. Just controlling the speed down in the millimeters and touchdown. And with Minmus's incredibly low gravity, the rocket will just gently tip over and lay on its side. Takeoff will be interesting. I'll have to side burn off the surface and then use the SAS system to pull myself up to clear the mountain, so it'll be almost like taking off an aircraft, but I should be able to pull it off without too much of an issue. I've got plenty of space to do it. But there you have it, an unplanned landing on Minmus with an unskilled pilot with tech that is pretty much available from the point you start the game. So of course, first things first, with a landing on a new planet, the most important thing you must do is plant your flag. I like to name mine after the area I land in, because they work as nav beacons for particular biomes and tell me where I've been, and it makes it very easy to plan out future landing missions. So after that, of course, you've got to take your set of screenshots, but we can't hang around doing that for too long. Valentina has a load of science experiments to reset and start pulling science out of the surface of Minmus. Until next time, click like if you do, subscribe if you want to see more. Fly smart, fly safe, and I'll catch you in orbit.